You think you know Henry VIII, the king with 6 wives. The guy who gave the Pope the middle finger and basically said, "I'm starting my own church with blackjack and divorces." Behind the royal robes was a paranoid, bloated wreck of a man rotting from the inside out and running his kingdom like a medieval episode of Jerry Springer with a body count. Pretty scandalous, right? His paranoia had paranoia. His body was a disaster zone. By the end, he was less His Majesty and more his catastrophe. Well, buckle up, because the real Henry VIII makes your history textbook look like a Disney Plus reboot. He wasn't just a monarch. He was a one-man demolition derby of bad decisions, broken alliances, and increasingly suspicious meals. And just when you think the horror show is over, his corpse literally explodes. Yes, this dude was so rotten that even in death, he managed to gross out an entire funeral procession. So grab a turkey leg, try not to gag, and prepare yourself. Because this is the grotesque, oozing, occasionally darkly hilarious tale of a king who ate too much, married poorly, and trusted no one, not even his own children. This is the king who rotted alive. Chapter 1. The Golden Boy of England at the dawn of his reign. Henry VIII wasn't just a king, he was a total Renaissance snack. We're talking tall over 6 feet in an era when most men were hobbit-sized, strong, athletic, handsome. Think NFL quarterback meets classical composer with just a dash of medieval swagger. He wasn't just flexing muscles, he flexed brains too. The guy wrote music, debated theology, and could charm the pants off a room full of diplomats, figuratively and occasionally literally. Foreign ambassadors were swooning. Nobles lined up to kiss his royal ring, and probably hoped that's all they'd have to kiss. He was dubbed the Golden Boy of Europe, and not just because his wardrobe had more bling than a Vegas magician. He hunted, jousted, danced like nobody was watching, except everybody was watching, because Henry made sure of it. England hadn't seen anything like him. For once, the monarchy wasn't a bunch of cranky old men. An itchy tightsit was vibrant, sexy, and ready for prime time. And in those early years, people truly believed Henry would usher in a golden age. And so did Henry's ego. But spoiler alert, this isn't a golden age story. It's more like a cautionary tale, wrapped in turkey legs and poor impulse control. Because fate had other plans. Chapter 2. The fall begins. The unraveling began in 1536. A jousting accident. One moment, Henry's playing medieval quarterback, charging full tilt for glory next moment. He's flying off his horse like a sack of royal potatoes and getting crushed underneath it. He was out cold for 2 hours. In Tudor times, that was less recover and hydrate and more start carving the tombstone. But Henry pulled through, sort of, because while his body technically survived, a big part of Henry, the man, did not. Modern historians think he suffered a traumatic brain injury, something that doesn't just scramble your eggs, but fries your empathy, and deep fries your self-restraint. The cheerful, athletic king, gone, replaced by someone more like your grumpy uncle after 3 bourbons and a Fox News marathon. Moody, impulsive, paranoid, and with the people skills of a snapping turtle. They even tried cauterization, aka the medieval version of "Have you tried turning it off and back on again?" Spoiler, it didn't help. We're talking ulcers so deep and infected you could lose a chess piece in there. They oozed pus constantly. He basically became a walking biohazard. And then his body started joining the rebellion. His one-spreezed legs, the envy of the court, turned into open disaster zones. Courtiers started carrying perfumed cloths just to avoid passing out. Imagine trying to hold a conversation while discreetly gagging into your sleeve. Welcome to Henry's court. Doctors threw everything at the problem. Potions, poultices, probably a few prayers, the smell. Let's just say it cleared a room faster than a political argument at Thanksgiving dinner. And Henry, he carried on like everything was peachy. Limping through life, stinking up the palace, refusing to acknowledge that he was slowly turning into royal compost. But make no mistake, the rot wasn't just on the outside. It was spreading inside his body, inside his mind. And the real horror, it was just getting started. Chapter 3. The Wives and the Blood They Shed, Henry VIII's. 6 wives are the stuff of legend. You probably know the rhyme. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Catchy, right? Like the worst jingle for a dating app in history. But the truth? it's way darker than a schoolhouse rhyme. These weren't just wives, they were walking targets in a high-stakes game of marry, murder, manipulate. Let's break it down, one unlucky lady at a time. Catherine of Aragon was his first queen. She gave Henry 20 years of loyalty, 1 daughter and 0 sons, which to Henry meant she'd failed at her one job, so he divorced her. That was polite. Then he banished her. Less polite. Then he separated her from her daughter Mary and left her to die alone. Super not polite. Accusations came flying: witchcraft, incest, adultery. She was forced to watch her brother and closest friends executed before her own date with the chopping block. Basically, Henry ghosted her 16th century style. Except back then, ghosting meant political exile and slow emotional torture, not just ignoring someone's texts. Anne Boleyn was everything Catherine wasn't. Young, witty, fiery, and not Catholic. Henry was obsessed. He literally rewrote the country's religion to marry her, and walked away with land, money, and her head still attached. But the honeymoon phase didn't last. When she didn't pop out a male heir on schedule, Henry snapped. Henry saw her portrait, thought she was hot, married her, and then met her in person and went, oh no. It was like Beauty and the Beast. If the beast never changed and the castle reeked of leg pus, yes, Henry literally made it a crime to marry him without turning over your entire dating history. Forget red flags, this guy was the flag. And here's the kicker. Most historians agree the charges were fake. So yeah, she basically got framed harder than a museum painting. But hey, she kept her head, which made her the MVP of the Tudor Wives Club. But that didn't last either. She died just 12 days after giving birth. Henry mourned her. She became less wife and more medieval hospice nurse. For about 5 minutes, then he swiped right on Europe's royal Tinder and started shopping for wife number 4. Jane Seymour was the true love of Henry's life. Translation, she gave him a son and didn't talk back, because nothing says grieving widower like immediately planning your next wedding. They were disposable pawns in Henry's deranged personal chess match, where the king made the rules, moved the pieces, and flipped the board every time he got bored. Anne of Cleves might be history's biggest winner by accident. He claimed she looked like a horse. They annulled the marriage after 6 months, but Anne agreed, called him her beloved brother. She basically invented the conscious uncoupling centuries before Gwyneth Paltrow. Catherine Howard was barely 17 when she married Henry, and by then, Henry was a rotting mound of ulcers and rage. She was executed for not disclosing past relationships. Her last words, allegedly that she'd rather have been the wife of a common man, relatable. Catherine Parr, the final wife, survived. Not because Henry finally mellowed out, but because she figured out the game. She kept him comfortable, stayed quiet, and probably developed the 1500s version of PTSD from dealing with his infected legs and explosive temper. These women weren't just royal consorts, and through it all, Henry sat on his throne of blood, bones, and beef pie. Judge, jury, executioner, and slowly rotting from the inside out. Chapter 4. A royal feast of epic proportions. You know that one uncle at Thanksgiving? The one who loads up his plate like it's the Last Supper, downs a gallon of gravy, and still circles back for pie. Yeah, Henry was that guy. Except it wasn't just once a year. It was breakfast. Every single day. Henry VIII didn't eat meals, he conquered them. This man was throwing down about 5,000 calories daily. And that's being generous. Some estimates say it was closer to 6,000. That's enough food to keep a CrossFit gym alive for a week. Meanwhile, half of England was trying to make soup out of turnips and regret. Massive pies stuffed with smaller pies, entire swans, decked out like centerpieces from a Las Vegas buffet. The royal kitchen, a military-grade operation. Over 200 staff working around the clock, preparing hundreds of dishes daily. Roasted boar, venison, goose, and of course, barrels of wine. Because nothing pairs with a gout flare-up like a nice vintage. And security. Oh, Buddy Henry had food tasters, backup tasters, and tasters to watch the tasters. If someone even sneezed near his roast chicken, it probably got replaced. This guy didn't just fear poison, he treated dinner like it was the final challenge in an Indiana Jones movie. But here's where it gets weird. Henry believed food gave him superpowers. No joke, swans were for elegance. Venison made him a better hunter, because eating deer somehow turns you into one. But did anyone dare tell him to slow down on the meat pies? Of course not. Oysters, well, let's just say he thought they helped with royal performance, and the throne groaned under the weight of one man's bottomless hunger. So, while England struggled with famine and religious turmoil, Henry sat in his custom chair too big to walk, too sick to stand feasting like a one-man Renaissance buffet. And all the while, his infected leg ulcers were dripping through the bandages, soaking into the carpet like something out of a horror movie. And Henry kept devouring like calories couldn't catch him, despite the fact that they very much had. This was a man who executed people for giving him side-eye. So his physicians kept quiet. His courtiers smiled through the smell. By the end, he was less King of England and more like a bloated monument to unchecked appetite. The banquet never ended. The ulcers never healed. Because if power corrupts, then absolute power gets seconds. Chapter 5. The Paranoia Palace by his later years. Henry VIII had gone full tinfoil hat. The guy made Stalin look like your laid-back uncle who just wants to grill burgers and play catch. Henry didn't trust anyone, not his nobles, not his wives, not even his own kids, and certainly not the walls. Which, by the way, he bugged. He literally had peepholes installed in palace walls so he could spy on guests. Welcome to Hampton Court. Don't mind the king breathing through the drywall. He slept with weapons under his pillows. Not just one dagger, either. Multiple blades, ready to go. You'd think someone that immobile would chill a bit, but no. This was Henry's idea of a security system. Be a 400-pound man who smells like gangrene, while also armed to the teeth under a goose feather mattress. And let's talk about the palaces. Secret passageways everywhere. Hidden doors, escape tunnels. The guy basically turned his royal residences into medieval escape rooms, but without the fun or snacks. His court. Forget Game of Thrones. This was Survivor, Tudor edition. Say the wrong thing. Tower of London. Look at the King Funny, Tower of London. Wear the same color as him on a feast day. Okay, maybe just public humiliation, but still, high stakes. Fashion faux pas were dangerous in Tudor times, and the paranoia wasn't just reserved for nobles. Henry had his own daughters Mary and Elizabeth spied on like they were plotting a hostile takeover of the throne. From their dollhouses, these were literal children, being treated like Bond villains in training. Honestly, it's shocking he didn't accuse his dog of treason. What's that, Max? You barked when I mentioned Anne Boleyn? Guards, the court lived in constant fear. Nobles tiptoed through conversations like they were walking over broken glass and socks. People were executed not for crimes, but for vibes. Suspicious energy was a capital offense. And all of this, from the daggers to the dungeon threats, was fueled by one thing: Henry's rotting body and mind. The worse his health got, the more convinced he became that everyone was out to get him. Spoiler alert, they weren't. But when you're oozing pus from your legs and hallucinating betrayal behind every tapestry, maybe clarity isn't your strong suit. So while England begged for stability, Henry built a palace of mirrors. Every one of them cracked, foggy and screaming, "Don't trust anybody." And that, my friends, is how you turn a kingdom into a royal episode of CSI. Tudor edition. Chapter 6. The Death of a Tyrant. And the explosion heard round the court when Henry VIII finally kicked the royal bucket in 1547. England collectively exhaled like someone had opened a window in a very smelly room. The tyrant was gone. The paranoia, the executions, the 6,000-calorie dinners, the rotting leg. Done. But here's the thing. Henry wasn't finished, because even in death, the man just could not stop being dramatic. See, by the time they got his body into the coffin, he was so bloated from decomposition gases that it was less rest in peace and more live-action science experiment. They wrapped his corpse in layers of lead, sealed him up tight, and hoped for the best. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. During the funeral procession on the way to his big fancy burial at Windsor Castle, the pressure built up inside his royal corpse like a shaken soda can, and then, boom, his body exploded. No, that's not a metaphor, like something out of a budget horror film. Royal guts on the highway, fluids leaking out of the coffin. One poor horse probably needed therapy. But no, Henry VIII, King of England, head of the church, defender of the faith, became medieval street meat. You don't go out with dignity, you detonate. And then, because this story just refuses to quit, dogs showed up. That's right, According to multiple accounts, stray dogs licked up the king's remains off the road. I wish I were making this up. This is what happens when you eat enough red meat to feed a Renaissance NFL team and ignore your leg ulcers for a decade. But wait, there's more. His tomb. It was a whole separate mess. They had to widen the grave to fit him. Even then, the body kept oozing the smell. Let's just say if a breeze existed in 1547, they'd have drowned the entire chapel in it. Some say the scent lingered for years. Is how Henry VIII made sure the final chapter of his life would be just as shocking, grotesque, and wildly unnecessary as everything that came before it. Historians chalk it up to decomposition, but I think it was Henry just being extra one last time. Because this man didn't just rot in life, he went nuclear in death. The king who tore England apart in life couldn't even go quietly into the ground. No peaceful passing, no somber silence. Just gas, gore, and a canine cleanup crew. And that is how Henry VIII made sure the final chapter of his life would be just as shocking, grotesque, and wildly unnecessary as everything that came before it. So there you have it, Henry VIII, the king who rewrote religion, married like it was a competitive sport, executed friends, enemies, and just about anyone who looked at him sideways, stuffed himself into immobility, and finally rotted his way into the history books and then exploded out of them. He wasn't just a monarch. He was a cautionary tale wrapped in royal robes and puss-soaked bandages. A walking reminder that when you give one man too much power, things don't just go downhill, they leak, burst, and smell like 3D old turkey left in the sun. You now know more about infected leg ulcers than you ever asked for. And if you re-hungry for more tales of kings and queens and the truly unhinged things they did in the name of power, hit that subscribe button, because history's not just written by the victors. Sometimes it's written in blood, sweat, and royal body fluids. And trust me, we're just getting started. And sure, Game of Thrones gave us shocking deaths, betrayals, even a few dragons. But Henry was the original boss-level villain, and he was 100% real. This wasn't fiction. This was royal history, raw, rotting, and way too human. So if you've made it this far, congratulations.